All right, so today we're going to talk about issues facing cities as they expanded, particularly after World War II, and what impact the development of suburbs had on the life of a city. So post-World War II, you're going to start to see a definite divide physically on how space was used in cities. So you're going to see a distinction between who lives in the inner city and who lives in the suburbs, and it's mostly going to be determined economically. Those who lived in the inner city or closer to the central business district are going to have physical, social, and economic issues that are going to be dealing with. First, we're going to start with what caused more of the physical deterioration of the residents in the buildings and houses closer to the central business district. So first of all, predominantly what you're going to see there is an increase in the number of lower income residents who occupy more parts of the area closer to the central business district. Why is that? So first of all, going into the later part of the 1800s, early 1800s, as cities were the fashionable place to live, you have wealthier folks with large houses on the fashionable part of town, but towards the mid part of the early 20th century, those folks are going to move out of those large houses and move into places in more right outside the city because they will have the transportation needs to come into the city for what they need, but want to expand their size of their house and land that comes with it. So these opulent mansions where they once lived were subdivided into smaller dwellings for more low-income families, and these would serve immigrants, various immigrants groups coming in waves starting in the late 1800s going on even to today. And as these houses were subdivided, more folks came in and the landlords did not take as much upkeep of these houses, so the rents were cheaper and you don't have as much tax revenue coming into the areas around it, so the cities do not have as much to spend on schools and public services. And also, if the income of the people living in those areas are dropping, they can't support services like stores and things like that. So businesses and restaurants might close around areas and people are going to have to go farther for those services. The second practice is what we call redlining. This is going to develop in the 1930s around the New Deal, when the Federal Housing Authority set up regulations for banks to follow when they loan people money. And what banks often did was they would do maps and they would refuse to lend money to people based on where they lived or where they wanted to move. And this usually was based on income and was also based on race. The banks would identify people living in certain geographical areas and consider where they were living, or where they want to buy a house would be a risk to the bank, and so they would not lend them money. And a lot of these times, their criteria were not accurate, but a lot of it was based on race. So what you're going to start to see is neighborhoods being completely based on race. You're also going to have developers who are not going to want to buy people of minorities, whether it's African Americans, Latinx folks, or other minorities, buy houses because they want to keep their neighborhoods of a certain mix. And as a result, what you're going to start to see as families are going to have to fix up houses in less desirable parts of town, but it's hard to get the money to do that, so they're having to do the best they can. So redlining is illegal, but it's hard to patrol, and it's still going on today when it comes to lending. So other issues that people in the inner city are facing: one, they're underrepresented. So there is this cycle of that folks get into. We call it an underclass. There's a high rate of unemployment, which often leads to alcoholism and drug use, not being able to attend school. One, if they do have a job, they have to work to support the families that support the family what money they can get. They might have to resort to crime to feed their families if they can't find a job, or they just get caught up in that because it's the culture of where they are at that point. Because there's less revenue coming into the city, or particularly where they live, there's the quality of schools and the hospitals are not as good as in other parts of the city or in the suburbs. And you also have homelessness is high because people can't afford rent, they don't have jobs, so the best they can do is live on the streets. So that is a cycle that people are trying to break, but a lot of times it's very hard because it's multi-generational in some places. And the documentary if you look at the Explore section, there's a quick documentary about Baltimore that kind of talks about that. Without intervention from nonprofits or local governments to provide technical training to come in and help these areas, to prop them up, to provide services, to help provide people jobs, this cycle will kind of continue. And the biggest thing is that folks need training and opportunities for this to succeed. Again, this underclass is also going to contribute to a cycle of poverty because you have a lot of kids born into single families of moms that the mom is the only one around, so mom can't work and take care of the kids at the same time. And so there is no support, so a lot of times the mom has to rely on public assistance. Often people turn to drugs because as an outlet, and oftentimes the drugs they have to do alternatives like crime to get the money for the drugs, and it just becomes a cycle. And again, you often will see increasing gang violence as well because of just protection, because things are really tough in these neighborhoods. It also gives people a sense of belonging as well. And often you will see neighborhoods segregated based on race. So you will see African American sections, Latinx sections. So it really depends on where people are and just the population of those areas as well. Some economic issues, like I said before, with lower income residents coming in, you don't have that tax base. So there's less public services that can be provided. So the states have two choices. You either reduce services altogether, or you try and raise tax revenues other places. So you look at your businesses, you look at your restaurants coming in, and your tourists. So areas of that city where you can make more money and try and balance that out. That does help a bit, but it hasn't been enough to kind of counteract the difference there. And since the 1980s, the federal government's been giving less money to cities, so that has also hurt the attempt to try and help rebuild them. In 2008, there was an economic recession because banks had been giving money to folks for mortgages, and a lot of people defaulted on those. So that really kind of sent a shockwave through the housing market. So that was a huge deal. A lot of people defaulted on their mortgages, so that hurt them more economically as it was. And so what you are going to see is that a lot of people became further in debt as a result. And with things going on now with COVID-19, a lot of folks who do have jobs in their city, work in service-based jobs, stocking grocery stores, Uber drivers, taxi cab drivers, in service-based, but have had to be let go because the services aren't needed right now. So that even further compounds the problem. All right, so a couple of other trends that we see. Ghettoization is where you have pockets within a city or a town where you have high concentrations of poverty. And usually this was for immigrants as they came in, because immigrants basically started with not a lot of money, then they got jobs, and they particularly kind of worked their way up through the economic. They would start out as lower income, then next generation more middle income and things like that. And what you will see though, since the 1950s, you've seen larger concentrations of this happening in the African American and the Latinx community since then. But there are other things that have contributed to this as well. The growth of urban ghettos. Blockbusting is something that real estate agents will do in regards to if you've got an area that's predominantly white, but real estate agents want to make money by selling houses. They might have a house for sale. They might bring a minority family in, show it to them, and then everybody freaks out and they want to move. So that's called blockbusting. Racial steering, again, when real estate agents will steer people to a particular area based on segregated housing patterns. And then redlining, which we talked about, which again, all of these are illegal, but they're frowned upon, but people still do it because it's more about making money. There have been attempts to reform cities. So many, Baltimore, they did this back in the late 90s, early 2000s, which helped the areas around the CBD, the Inner Harbor, but caused even more issues because it forced the lower income population into about a 2 or 3 city block of the city of Baltimore back about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe longer, when they had the Freddie Gray riots. This is where it happened. So with urban renewal, the city would require housing or sections of the city where folks had either moved out because they couldn't afford it or things were run down. They would demolish it, rebuild it, and try and reduce the cost of housing and move people to other parts of the city. Some people called it Negro removal in the 1960s. So they were trying to kind of change the way things looked. And what they did during this time period, 2 different things. One, they had the establishment of public housing. This was done during the Johnson administration. So in cities, you had public housing, so the rent was reduced. It was more like apartment style housing, and it was more for lower income. They only had to pay about 1/3 of the rent. It was maintained by the housing authority, usually by the city, and it was only about 1% of most of the dwellings. Now, the U.S. government has stopped the funding for this, and what they're trying to do now is look at renovating old buildings and then trying to sell those to people for a reduced cost. You also have what we call renovated housing, which is more like what Habitat for Humanity will go in and work with their family, renovate a house, and help them secure a mortgage that they can afford to work with the family based within their income level. These are some pictures of urban renewal and people fighting it, saying, look, this is not working. Let's try and keep our community the way it is. Another issue is gentrification, where middle-class folks will move into an area that's deteriorated, buy the house really cheap, then fix it up, and that cause it, because it's cheaper in the suburbs, it's close to where they work, they don't have children, but what happens is that causes the price of the other houses in the neighborhood to go up as they fix up the neighborhood, and so that displaces more people, and that causes the question of where do they go with gentrification. So some people argue that it's going to disperse more of the lower income folks throughout the city as opposed to clumping them together. And but some people argue, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because then they have where are they going to go? Because again, rent is more expensive in other places. So that is a big question. It does help with development, but it also can be issues. And last but not least, you have urban expansion, you have annexation, where cities add more land to the city. You do have urban settlement. So a city is a legal entity that includes the area that the city's built up as an MSA is a functional area that is connected to the city. And again, the city is urban settlement and the area around it. And usually the suburbs will include it, and the centrality just depends on where you are. An urban area is a U.S. city, and then the surrounding suburbs, that's more urbanized areas. So the D.C. metro area would be Washington, D.C., and then the suburbs around it, and we've already talked about MSA. So this is your first intro into issues with cities, and then we'll talk more about suburbanization later on this week.